This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. It's something always exciting and different, and today is no different. I have the great honor of introducing and having a conversation with Tom Sims. Now, he is a podcaster, he runs a comedy club, and he's a stand-up comic. That's how it all started. So let's find out about his story. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Tom Sims. Tom, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a great honor to meet you. I mentioned all the great things you've done in your recent years, but let's give everybody a foundation. How long were you, or are you still a stand-up comic? Do you still perform?
No, I don't. I if I'm at the club, I'll go up and maybe introduce the show and, sort of welcome everybody, but I don't really perform anymore. I did under duress a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact, but other than that, no, I really don't perform anymore.
So you and I are of the same age, so let's get some perspective. When did you start your life in comedy? What made you become a stand-up comic, and when?
Well, originally I wanted to be a stand-up when I was a kid, real young. I got into stand-up comedy, and that was kind of my dream as a young, 12, 13-year-old kid, but there wasn't a lot of paths, as a 12-year-old in the 80s in Iowa. So I ended up getting into music, and I was in the music business for, 20 years plus. And then my wife and I moved to Arizona in 2007. All of a sudden there were open mics and comedy classes and all sorts of, it was a comedy scene. And that was just something completely foreign to me coming from where I came from. So that's when I started pursuing it. I started in 2009, and then about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided I started producing shows, and I found that I enjoyed that more than I did performing. So that was kind of the path to opening my own club.
So you didn't get into comedy until later in your life. You're no longer 12 years old. How old were you when you kind of first went on stage?
I would have been 39 when I first performed.
Yeah, so unlike a lot of comics that do get their start in their late teens or 20s, you had a little bit of a break, got a chance to start as an adult with a full life of experience to pull from for your comedy. Mm-hmm. Do you remember any of your first jokes or material? What was your vein of entertainment that you like to share?
When I started, I was married and had a family, so that was a lot of the material, was just kind of that. And as a stand-up, when you first start, you're just worried about trying to be funny, jokes. You depend on the material probably a lot more, and you don't get too deep yet. So I just did a lot of sort of, marriage stuff and kid stuff and things like that.
Well, but that's good advice, Tom, to other comics. You always want to talk about what you know. You want to engage with the audience and share about yourself, and you'll find that most of the audience can relate to that. Did you have a hook or a type of presentation, or was it straight monology?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much. I'm pretty left brain, so it was. I really worked on the jokes and the material, and I knew where every pause was going to be, and all of that, and I would constantly trim and stuff like that. So I was more of a writer than a performer, I think. And my personality, I'm a little more introverted, so I'm not
You're not
I'm
carrying
not a
your
big
show.
act out guy,
Yeah,
right?
you're not carrying the show with your own personal energy.
Yeah, exactly.
As we've both seen other comics have done. I mean, that was kind of maybe one of the hallmarks of Robin Williams, is that
Sure.
his energy and his excitement about being on stage really brought the audience into his material. But there's plenty of comics. Stephen Wright's the most famous, that was very deadpan. It was just joke in a very slow and concise way. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. And you were leaning more towards that way, but doing monology much like a Jay Leno or Jerry Seinfeld.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you get good enough that you were featuring or headlining and hit the road?
I guess I kind of got to the point where I was featuring. I had a real job during the day, and I had a family, so I couldn't, run off and join the circus and travel around.
Great way to put it.
So yeah, I got to travel a little bit, and I did have a good day job at the time, so I could afford to fly someplace and feature and lose money just because it was fun to do. So I was kind of at that point, and being in Phoenix, there were a number of clubs that I was able to work, so I got quite a bit of work in town. But yeah, it was I never got to do the whole road thing.
You weren't a John Fox road warrior kind of guy, or
No.
Danny Johnston, or one of those guys that famously stayed on the road for a long, long time. Well, I think that it's fascinating, though, that you got a late start, but you had the balls to get up on stage and perform at 40 and build yourself up. It sounds like you were a little bit more anal and did it through writing as opposed to performance entertainment. It was really a written entertainment that you were sharing with the audience. Did you get the same feeling that most of us do on stage? It is kind of addictive and fun, at least those first 6 years?
When I first started, it was also new and exciting to me, and learning the mechanics of joke writing was really fun. And as you know, comedy is not easy, and it takes a long time to sort of find your voice and who you are and figure yourself out. And I think by the time that I was ready to sort of move on and open my club, that's kind of about where I was in my development. Is I was starting to kind of figure out, okay, this is who I am. This is how I start to do this. I was just sort of knocking on that door around the same time. Like I said, I enjoyed performing. I did well. I was working, but it wasn't that I'm trying to figure out a way to say this. It wasn't enough to where I really preferred to producing the shows, and I was looking more towards that.
Well, I totally get it. I mean, I was an MC at my club for over 20 years. I had more time on stage than most entertainers, but I wasn't a comic. I didn't write material. But it sounds like for you, stand-up comedy wasn't one of those moments. It was just a fun passage of your life, but you found your interest in comedy. At what point did you decide to open a club, and how did you do that? I mean, that's so interesting that you did that transition from comic to comedy producer.
Well, again, I'm sort of an analytical person. My day career was in software, so my brain just works that way. So I just kind of started learning about comedy as any comedian does, about how a show should go and the environment and the psychological sort of vibe in the room, and all of that kind of stuff just really started appealing to me. And I started producing my own shows around town and booking those and learning a little bit more. And then it was just sort of wouldn't it be neat someday to open a club? That's kind of where I was at. And then I met a couple guys who owned other bars and restaurants, Don Talbot and Clay Moiso, and we kind of became friendly and stuff. And I mentioned to them how I'd like to do that someday, and they're like, "Well, let's do it." like, oh, well, geez, this is real now. So that's next thing you know, we did it. So that was kind of quick at the end there.
Yeah, it's. I'm sure you found it exhilarating. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, and so for me, the challenges and what you have to work your mind around to open a business, to me, is exhilarating. It's kind of like what a comic feels when they get an audience really on that ride. But going from comic, even an anal one that's into the writing and into the distinct aspects of the performance, going to comedy club owner, as I've mentioned a couple times on other interviews, now you're not just a producer. You're a bartender, or, you own a bar, and you're doing food service, or you're a restaurateur. Going to the business side can be so challenging and so different. Now, you having the type of analytical mind that you have, you may have been better at it than me, but it is interesting that with the help of your partners who had that experience, so they were helping with that aspect of it, right? The bar and the food and how you actually, the whole brick and mortar aspect of owning a business, hiring employees, dealing with HR. I mean, it's really a whole different world.
Oh, for sure. And it would have, I think I'm a smart enough guy, I would have figured stuff out eventually, but for sure they saved me a lot of heartache and money. And they were great. They were experienced in this space, and they could have just sort of bulldozed me over and said, well, this is how this is done. But they weren't like that. They were like, okay, this is how we do things. How can we tweak this for comedy? And it was a very great back and forth relationship. And, as you know, the distraction is the death of comedy, live comedy. So everything that we did was channeled through that, minimizing distractions, whether that be the menu selections, how the tables and chairs are set up, the room itself. I think they learned a lot about the comedy business that way as well. So it was a great back and forth that we had, sort of putting all this stuff together through the prism of keeping it easy for the audience to not distract them from the show. It's not a restaurant. It's a comedy club, so all of the restaurant stuff, if you will, has to serve the comedy show. So that was kind of the way we went into it. And it was a lot of fun. And I've since become obsessed with the customer experience. I love it.
Well, I think it's genius. And I was not so lucky. I was 24 when I opened my club, and it was totally by the seat of my pants. I made all those early mistakes. I learned all those different aspects of the various business vehicles that you have to bring to the equation. But I think it's great that you had that opportunity to mix the producer entertainment side with the restaurateur bartender side, with the support of your partners. I mean, it sounds like a perfect symmetry to come together to make it happen. Congratulations. That had to have been so much fun to be a part of.
Yeah, eventually. I was
scary,
pretty stressed.
A little scary too, right?
Yeah. You're rolling the dice, you're risking a lot opening any business, financially, and, we have investors, and now I have strangers and friends who I'm responsible for their investment. And that was a lot of pressure on me. And, I tend to be a little bit of a control freak. And when you're opening a business, you're out of control. You're trusting a lot of other people who aren't nearly as attached to your business as you are. So that was pretty stressful for me. And I'm not a seat of my pants person, really. I'm a preparer to the point of, sometimes I overthink things. Yeah, that's my big problem that I'm constantly dealing with. So I was as prepared as I could possibly be, but it was a stressful time for me, for sure. Even looking through the old pictures of the build out process, I could still get that stress ball in my stomach just looking at those pictures, and it's been 5 years,
Oh, well, I'm sorry you went through that. For me, that's the fun part. I love the thrill of that risk, that challenge to, am I going to make it or not make it? And, find the mistakes and fix them and stuff. But I think that it's interesting that you went for speaking as the comic of the group. How was it for you going from comic to producer? Did you immediately see the unique aspects of each, or was it a slow transition?
Well, no, I think any comedian who's been doing it for a while can tell you, some of the things that are going to be good, keeping the audience together and sitting them up front and those type of things, you learn just from being a comedian. And then maybe I might have taken it to a little OCD level and where I really get into the details, but that's where that's very fun for me. So I think a comic, there's pro and con of a comedian who opens a club that I found. I think we know the things that make a room good for comedy, but a lot of comics who become club owners just kind of, I think, they want to do it for themselves. Either they want to further their comedy career, or they want it to be about them and all of that stuff. And that could be a detriment to the show for other reasons. So I kind of joke that I'm the perfect comedy club owner in that I'm a comedian with no comedic aspirations. So I bring the knowledge that comics have about how to produce a show, but I'm not doing that. I don't want to be a comedian anymore. So I'm not, I'm not using this as my own open mic.
Well, I think that's a good point. And there's only one other person that I think has successfully done it. Michael Finney, a comic magician, opened up Finney Bones and has had good success with that, and he still performs. So he is walking that tightrope of both comedian and business owner, and he's one of just a few, if any, others that I can think of right off the top of my head. But Tom, what you were able to do was fascinating from the side aspect of comedians aren't really known for their business acuities, right? They're not really sharp when it comes to the business side. In fact, a lot of your podcast, and I have to give you kudos for this, a lot of your podcast is helping young comics understand that show business is a business, and there are certain things like in your interview when you spoke with a good friend of mine, Barry Neal, who's a producer and booker. You're sharing information about how important it is for any young comic to understand that they have a business responsibility. Even, like as a salesman, you have to sell yourself to the clubs. You can't just show up and people are going to assume you're funny. You have to go through all the steps, the rungs of the ladder to get that acknowledgement. But I've already gone off on my main topic. So here's the thing. First off, let's get a plug. What's the name of your club and where is it located?
Stir Crazy Comedy Club. We're in Glendale, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix.
Well, that's how you know Michael. I'm sorry.
Yep.
He's in that area. So let me write that down. Where's it located?
It's in Glendale, Arizona, at Westgate, which is a big entertainment district.
All right. That is just so interesting. Now, so you didn't really have that problem of transitioning. What about going from being in the green room with the other comics to being the boss? Did you have you must have known a lot of the guys you booked originally. Was there any conflict or interesting relationship issues when you're becoming, instead of going from, you went from peer to boss? How did that go with your friends in comedy?
It's fun. That's a great question. And I've had this conversation with others. So at heart, I feel I'm a comedian. I like being a comedian. I like talking to comics. I like being around comics. I like talking comedy, all of that. There's nothing better than a table full of comics just talking shop and joking around. That's the best. And what I didn't appreciate was the change that was going to happen in that dynamic, where now I'm not just another comic. I'm a club owner that can give them work. So that dynamic has changed drastically. So, they laugh at my jokes a little harder. They listen a little more intently when I'm pontificating. And, I get it because I was on that side of the table, but that kind of takes some of the fun out of it for me because I just want to be a comic and hang around comics, but I'm not that anymore. There's a little asterisk next to me wherever I go where, nobody's going to call me on my BS because they don't want to, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It's like, no, I want you to make fun of my shirt. You know what I mean? I want you to bust my balls. So that has changed. And, it kind of sucks a little bit because I just want to be one of the guys hanging out, talking shop. And I'm really not anymore because it's different. Now, some of my close friends are still like that, but comic friends. But, for everybody outside of that initial circle, it's just different. It's just a different thing now. And, that's kind of a bummer because I even like, I'll hear, maybe somebody on stage and I'll hear like a tag in my head. Right. And as a comic, you would tell someone, hey, you could say this, but now I remember club owners telling me tag ideas that I didn't think would work. But now you kind of feel obligated because, the owner thinks I'm going to say this, and now I got to say this. So I don't even suggest tags anymore because I don't want them to feel that they have to feel that, the club owner said I better say this, so I'm going to say it. I don't want to do that to them. So I don't, you know what I mean? So even fun little things like that, I just can't do anymore. So you really sort of end your comedy. You're not a comedian anymore. Now you're a club owner, whether you want it to be that way or not, if that makes sense.
Right. No, you just shared so many important things. I mean, first off, whenever you're the boss and become the comedy producer, there's sacrifices. And whether it's to your married life or your social life or your business life, when you're an entrepreneur and you're a business owner, it's a whole different world. That is your commitment. If it's going to succeed, you have to really own it and put everything into it. But it changes the dynamic of a lot of relationships. For me, my early employees / partners were high school buddies. And as my comedy world grew, they all peeled off one at a time and I had to let a couple go, which really was stressful on relationships. But in the comedy world, it is so true that first off, I want to agree with you that hanging with comics backstage in the green room or sitting around a table or having drinks after a show, for me, was one of the great moments, one of the great valuable times of my life as a producer. But I was always the boss. So I kind of wore that hat, not so much with pride, but I wore that hat and understood. I was a little naive. I thought people actually liked me, not the fact that I was paying them. But it was, there was a little bit of a shield up because people couldn't be a jerk to me because I was still where their bread and butter came from. So, me coming from the business side and never being on the comedy side may have given me that better protection against those kind of concerns. But I think the fact that you went through that transition where one minute there's your buddy struggling comic next to you and the next minute you're his boss. A lot of people don't understand that when you're producing a show, whether it's a one-nighter, a week, or a club, when you're paying somebody to entertain, you're their boss for that week. I've had some of the biggest names on my stage, Robin Williams, Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, Dana Carvey, you name it. You're still telling them what to do. You're telling them when to start, how much time to do. If they do something wrong, my job was on it. Now, it's interesting that you have found that you're not as engaging on the comedy side. I, on the other hand, being arrogant and not as talented as you, always shared my opinion. I felt it was my job as a producer to guide people, and I helped a lot of careers. Brian Posehn, Paula Poundstone, Carlos Alazraqui. There was a lot of people that I had a chance to work with that I think that my view and my observance of what they were doing helped them grow as a performer. So I took the job as producer very seriously. As a producer, you're not offering taglines, but you must still guide young comics.
You know, when comics ask me business related stuff, how bookings and how they should, approach people, stuff like that, I'm all in. I'll give you whatever advice I can. When it comes to their actual material, I've never been really comfortable with that. It's, some people can teach and some people can, and I can't. I can tell someone what I would do to make that joke sound good for me, but I don't know if that's going to help you. So if somebody asks me for an opinion, I'm certainly happy to give one, but I always kind of, give that caveat as, well, this is how I would do it, but you're not me. And I've talked about this and on my podcast before. There's a young comedian, Dana Wisson in Phoenix, and she makes me laugh. I have no idea what she's doing on stage. I don't understand it, but she makes me laugh. And, I give her an example of, I couldn't possibly help her with her material because I don't know what the hell she's doing. And I wouldn't want to ruin it. I wouldn't want to mess it up because she's just completely different from anything that would work for me. So I wouldn't want to taint what she does by trying to give her advice. So I don't know. Again, if somebody, asks me, what do you think? What about this, the way this was phrased or whatever? I'm happy to give my opinion, but I definitely don't give my opinion unsolicited. I just don't feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, that is, I think, there's some value to what you're saying, is that let the artist be the artist. And you've changed hats. You're the producer now. You're the club owner. You're the business entrepreneur. You want to focus on that and trust the talent that you're booking. But I think that's probably where we differ. I took more responsibility for what I was putting on stage and felt like as the producer, it was my job to, for example, if I had somebody that I thought was going to do a certain type of a show and they went up and it was just F-bombs right and left, right? It's my job as the producer to fire their ass, or to when they get off stage, tell them, okay, thanks for lying to me about what you're going to do, and you're never going to be able to do it again because you abused my audience. For me, it was always about the audience, right? Like what you said, when you were designing your club, we want the best possible scenario for the entertainment of the audience. That is the key. A lot of comics, and this might be why they fail as club owners, is like you mentioned, it's about them. And I've always tried to teach comics that I was interacting with that it's not about them on stage. They're performing, they have a job to do, they're the entertainment, but they're getting paid for the value of the audience. It's the audience experience, as you mentioned so strongly early on, that I think is key. So one of the great things about being a club owner and producer is working with people that you're interested in. Have you been able to bring in any of your comedy heroes, or make a point of bringing somebody that really excited you onto your stage?
Oh, for sure. I'm a pretty small club. We only seat 100. So, a lot of my options are limited. Fortunately, we've built up a good reputation to where I can kind of reach up out of my budget a little bit. And I'm a comedy nerd. I love the history of stand-up. I love the old school, titans. I've been able to get a few of those. I've had Bobby Slayton. I've got Jake Johansson coming back for the second time. Yeah. So those are a thrill for me, just to be able to say, please welcome, Jake Johansson. That blew my mind when he did the club. So yeah, but going back to what you just said, my club is a club my size. For the most part, people that come to my club don't really know who the headliners are. They're, I don't get the big names. There's other big clubs in the Phoenix area that get the big names. So I'm really, the people that come to my club are just trusting that we're going to have good comedy. So that adds another layer of stress, if you will, to me, because I got to make sure that even though they don't know who they're about to see, they have to leave having a good time. So I'm pretty sure of what's going to happen on my stage before I book anybody. I don't book. In 5 years, I've booked maybe 3 headliners that I've never seen in person before. And most of those I had performed with. So I was pretty sure of what was going to happen. And then, the same with the undercard, the hosts and features. Before I book anybody, I'm pretty certain of what's going to happen on stage before the show. And I make it clear for my hosts. I ask certain things of my hosts, and I make sure that they understand that. And I tell them, I'll never tell you what not to say, but if you don't do what if you're not who I expect, then I'm not going to have you back. And that, and I have a lot of friends that I knew from comedy that I haven't booked because I don't think they're right for the club or whatever it might be. So I'm pretty discerning that way. But I just don't get involved in the details of their act.
Yeah, well, I think that you made a couple of good points there. First off, you're absolutely correct if you're looking for some confirmation from somebody older and wiser in the business, and that is that the club has to be the destination. It's okay to get a name act once in a while, but you need those Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday butts in the seats, and that means that they're just trusting that they're going to have a good time if they come. So that's a great attitude to have as a club owner. Congratulations for figuring that out. And then 2, the fact that you got a chance to work with Jake Johansson and Bobby Slayton, 2 guys that kind of got their start at my club. We're a different generation. For me, the exciting people to bring in were, Tommy Chong or Graham Chapman from Monty Python, Soupy Sales, Pat Paulson. Those were the heroes I got to work with, but generationally that's different. But still, I think it's, you're still doing this. I'm retired, but as a club owner, have some fun, take advantage of your position and take that risk like you did going into the business. Sometimes you bring in a show that you're going to lose money on, but it benefits the club, it benefits you, and it keeps that excitement and energy going. The other thing that I wanted to go back to was that now that you're booking shows, and you started with one-nighters and events, which, by the way, I still do. That's always a fun thing to do because you don't have that long-term responsibility of staffing and running a bar and a restaurant. You just kind of go in, have some fun, and do a show and get out. It's kind of the quick and dirty way of doing production. But what has been fun for you as a club owner? I mean, what have been some of the highlights of your 5-year career running a club?
And this is going to sound corny, and I understand that and I accept that. But, when the show's over and people are leaving and you can see on their face that they just had one of those elevated nights of what comedy can be, that truly makes it all worthwhile. And I know that sounds trite and corny and all of that, but, and I take pride in in all of the millions of details that I obsess over to make a good room and a good show, that we were part of that. I just want to set these comics up the best possible way to let them do what they do. And when people leave and had one of those great nights of comedy, and they're still almost out of breath when they leave, and they tell me their face still hurts and all of that stuff. I mean, that really makes all the problems with the soda machines and the cook that called in at the last minute, all those troubles just kind of seem, far away when that happens. That really makes it worth their while. Oh. And, just the relief, you feel all of this. I'm a very stressful person. I feel I'm in constant state of stress. So, after 5 years and we're still here, or even through a pandemic and we're still here, I do get a sense of just a big relief and satisfaction that, oh my God, we're still here after 5 years. So, I'm starting to just now, the first few years were nothing but just constant stress, but, now I'm starting to sort of just take a breath and appreciate that we're still here. We're still doing it. We still got all of our regulars coming out and things are all right. So that's kind of where I'm at now, but, definitely definitely seen, Jake Johansson and Bobby Slayton on my stage, and Jimmy Walker. Those I still can't get my head around. They were on my stage.
Well, congratulations, by the way. The first
Thank you.
5 years, any business as an entrepreneur, the first 5 years are key. That's, you've made it. And 2, you're starting to have fun with it. I wish I was around to encourage you to have fun with it earlier on, but it is something that you should never go into a business if you're not going to have fun with it. But the most proud thing that I wanted to share with you is that you were saying it was trite and stuff. I am just applauding. Oh, wait, here we go. A little applause. That's enough of that. To the fact that you understand that as a producer, the real heartfelt joy. It's good to make a show go off. It's great to get the food and the drinks go in and out and make some money. But for me, in my 21 years running a chain of comedy clubs, watching the audience for me was when it lifted my heart. I know, and again, it sounds crazy. It sounds a little overspoken, but for the comics, when they get that wave of laughter coming at them and they feel that adrenaline and they get that sense of completeness on stage, for a producer, for me, and it sounds like for you, rightfully so, that audience reaction, that realizing that you've changed those people's lives, even if it was just for a couple hours, brought them a distraction, an entertainment, and got them laughing, which is really healthy, get the endorphins going. But still, it's what you take away from the audience. So when you said that, in my head, I'm like ringing bells and stuff, because that is really the key for a producer. And I think that's the difference between a comic and a producer, Tom, is that as a comic, you wanted to entertain the audience and get that sense of adrenaline and success in your own heart. But as a producer, it's what you're bringing to that particular audience. And by the way, podcast listeners, it doesn't matter if it's 10 people or 1,000 people. If you entertain that group of strangers and you gave them value for their dollar and you brought something, you created something as the producer that made a difference even for just a short time in their life, for me, that was everything. So it's great to hear you say that.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially a room, like I said, like mine, where the audience generally doesn't even know who the headliner is. So they don't even have that in common. You have you have a room full of completely, the demographics are all over the place at my club, and they're all together on this same wave that's being, guided by this person on stage. I mean, I'm not good enough with words to put that feeling into words, but that's the greatest. It's for 90 minutes in these people's lives, they're having a great time with all these people from different backgrounds and demographics and stuff, and they're all doing this together. It's a great feeling, and it is cool that I'm, in my small way, I'm part of that. That is a great feeling.
Oh, I would take ownership, Tom. You made that happen. So congratulations, and you should value that feeling. Let's take the conversation to something that's current and happening right now. We're both podcast creators. Mine we're on right now is entertainment-based, informational-based, and just about stand-up comedy. But what I am impressed is, ladies and gentlemen, use your Googler and check out the podcast, The Business of Comedy, with Tom Sims, and you cannot go wrong, especially if you have any interest in the stand-up comedy world. Your podcast, Tom, is so great. You talk about so many amazing things, but it's a different perspective than mine. You're not going after necessarily the art of stand-up comedy or the perspective from the entertainment side, like a producer. You're taking it from your analytical base and looking at it as the business side, and I've really enjoyed it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you will too. You do interviews with club owners, comics, concert promoters, bookers, great people that I've had a chance to work with, like Jan Karam, good friends in comics like Barry Neal, who's a booker and a comic. You even had on your podcast Jenny, who took over my club, Laughs Unlimited. So you,
I did.
yeah. So I mean, I really love what you're doing, but I've kind of gone on. Why don't you explain to the audience in your words why you do the business of comedy and where it's bringing you value?
Well, it stemmed from a conversation with a good friend of mine. He's become a good friend of mine, Matt Chavez. He owns the LA Comedy Club in Las Vegas. And I had done a guest spot for them years ago, 10 years ago, probably. So he only knew me as a comic, and, now I'm a club owner. So we kind of talked shop, and I was having a conversation with him one night at his club, and we were just kind of venting about something that comics do, just as one club owner to another. And in my head, I'm thinking, when I was a comedian, I would love to have overheard two owners talking about this, because it would help me,
Yeah.
in my career, and it was literally that night where I was like, I'm going to do that as a podcast, just where I talk to other people in the business. We talk about what's on our mind, and hopefully it'll help comics understand the nature of the business and maybe help with them in their pursuits, whatever those pursuits might be. And then it kind of morphed into, just other people in the business to give you an idea of, kind of what their roles are and how they work and stuff like that. But that was the impetus of it. It was just, I thought it might be helpful to comics, and this stuff is endlessly interesting to me. I mean, if you were and I met in a bar, I would have this conversation for hours. I love talking this stuff. So I just kind of started doing that, and it was just interesting who I would start hearing from. Like I've heard from other club owners that listen to it. I've heard from people that aren't in comedy at all, which is fascinating to me. But obviously I hear from a lot of comedians as well. I just kind of kept going. But it is a lot of fun for me. I mean, I love talking about all of this stuff. So this is more for me, I guess, than anybody else, but hopefully people enjoy it.
Well, I think as a podcast creator, it's important that you do something you're passionate about, that you have an interest in. For me, it's stand-up comedy as an art form. And so I like to share performances and share conversations with comics. I've done a couple interviews with managers and producers and club owners. Recently had Bob Fisher from the Ice House on my show.
Sure.
And we love talking about the industry and about comedy and how it's created and what it brings to an audience. I really enjoy, but of course I'm a club owner. I'm still producing shows. I produce comedy fundraisers on a regular basis. So I love your podcast, The Business of Comedy. It's available on all platforms because you're digging into the business side. And what I've learned in this podcast and this interview is that you have an analytical side, and you've taken it a couple more steps than I ever would have and dug into what works and doesn't work. In fact, your recent podcast about the value of email comedy proposals, where comics are reaching out via email to try to get booked. And that wasn't a thing when I was a club owner. There was no such thing as email. I'm back in the day when everybody sent me VHS tapes. I mean, I could have built a small building out of VHS tapes, right? And I had
I can imagine.
I had to assign one of my employees to watch them all. And then somebody I trusted, and then they picked out, the ones that they thought I would like. And then I'd go through and watch those. And then I decided who I booked. And like you, I mostly booked people that I had seen. I would travel to San Francisco or LA or Reno, Tahoe, and I would showcase, or I would watch a comic, and then I would, approach them about appearing at my club, or when they approached me, I'd say, "Oh yeah, I saw you at such and such," and that's how I met Jake Johansson. So there's real value to entertainers, potential club owners, and I think even a general audience, from the aspect that what you're digging into on the Business of Comedy podcast is all the little nuances on the business side. The only thing I might recommend is that you should bring in one of your partners and talk about the challenges and the good and bad of running the bar and running the food aspect, because it all comes together on the business side of being a club owner. But the business of comedy, you've nailed it. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I would actually. I would love to have them come on. I have an idea for an episode that I'm putting together. It's going to be kind of a complicated episode, starting from ground zero. So you want to open a comedy club and just go through the entire process. And I thought bringing them in for that would be a fun episode.
Well, fun or scary.
Yeah.
You have to relive all those challenges and stress points. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Tom is obviously a decent comic if you were getting paid as a feature and working around the Arizona clubs. And now a very successful comedy club owner. You got to go by and check out Stir Crazy in Glendale, Arizona. And if you're a working comic, feel free to send Tom a properly presented email and video of yourself, and maybe you can get some work at his great club. Tom, from the podcast creator point of view, what joy has that brought you? I know that talking to all these comics and producers and bookers brings value to the listener. Has it been valuable to you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like I said, it's just fun for me. I can talk endlessly about this stuff. I love talking about it, and the podcast is a great way for me to, get to talk to people about the business. So it really is sort of for my own fun, really.
A little selfish.
But, yeah, it is. I want to have these conversations.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. No, I think that's so important to do that, as much as we're all about the audience and we're producing shows and dealing with comics, I think the reason I do a podcast is it's a way for me to reconnect and stay connected with the industry. And so I get a personal selfish balance out of it, but I think that it's good that that's true for you as well, that it's something that you really enjoy. So Tom, what's coming up, let's say in 2023, 2024, that maybe you're excited about or looking forward to? And give us two versions, one with your club and one for the podcast.
Well, as far as the podcast, I mean, there's really no grand plan. I just, I try to come up with topics, and then when I have a topic, I find somebody that I can talk to about that topic. That's probably the biggest challenge I have with my podcast is it's not really guest based to where I can just pull someone in. Yeah. So that's difficult, coming up with topics that people are interested in. The booking email episode is by far my most popular episode. And that stemmed from, that's one of the most common questions I get from comedians is my advice on booking emails, what, the content, how often they should send, all that stuff. So I thought, well, heck, I'll do an episode on booking emails. So it's really about finding a topic. And I don't want to get into a position to where I just have to throw an episode together because there's, one expected today. So sometimes I take little breaks until I can get one. And then, just by chance, I have an opportunity where I knock a bunch out. Maybe I'm out of town at a festival or something. But that's the hardest part, is just keeping, getting the topics in a timely fashion. So I just kind of take them as they come now.
And you have to keep it fun for you, Tom.
Yeah, for sure.
How about with the club, Stir Crazy in Glendale, Arizona?
Stir Crazy. Well, we just signed our lease was up after 5 years, so we just signed for another 5 years. So we're going to keep on keeping on. Yeah. And that's kind of just that's kind of going. And then there's some other things sort of in early stages that aren't far enough along that I would be comfortable even mentioning them. But other clubs, Stir Crazy and otherwise, are potential opportunities. So I'm just kind of rolling with it and waiting for opportunities to present themselves, I guess.
Well, that's so, I mean, it's still, there's nothing wrong with that. You're going with the flow, Tom. And I think that you found a great foundation in both the producer aspect of owning a comedy club, the business side of owning a comedy club, and then as a podcast creator, that's kind of your fun time. I think that you have a good balance there. Congratulations on all your success. And I'm sure that the next 5 to 10 years is just going to keep building on the success you've already had and keep growing. And it's just exciting to hear about. Thank you so much for being a part of my podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you're in the Arizona area, Glendale specifically, be sure to go by and say hi to Tom at Stir Crazy Comedy Club. But in the meantime, for my listeners overseas and everywhere else, check out The Business of Comedy. It's a great podcast if you're interested in stand-up comedy as an art form and as a business person. It teaches so much. And Tom, I'm sure you'll continue to share the various analytical aspects of the business side of comedy.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great show. Thanks, Tom, for being here.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.